we mentioned earlier, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has announced that transgender people are no longer welcome in the United States military. There's a lot of confusion, apparently, within the administration about when and how this new policy is going to be unveiled. But here to talk about that with us now is Matt Thorn. Matt is the interim executive director of Outserve SLDN. That's an organization which represents the U.S. LGBT military community worldwide and also helps educate that community, provides legal services, advocates for transgender service, provides developmental opportunities, and does so much more. So first of all, Matt, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. And I actually got rid of the interim title, so now I'm just executive director.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So listen, we know the basics. We've talked about it. And did I accurately summarize the situation as you understand it?
Yeah, so yesterday, out of the blue, the president decided to tweet a new position on transgender service members. We had no idea it was coming, no expectation. Things have been relatively operating smoothly with the lifting of the ban from last year, so it was really out of the blue.
Yeah, and just for our listeners who don't know, it was last year under President Obama that the ban on transgender folks serving in the military was lifted for the first time. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. The Pentagon began studying the issue in July of 2015, and Secretary Carter lifted the ban in July of 2016. The policy is officially rolled out in October for currently serving. And then we were due to have the accessions policy July of this year, but that's been delayed by 6 months.
So let's talk about the study for a second, because I think that's important. This is Trump's decision to ban transgender people from serving is haphazard, is just out of the blue, as you said, is apparently done to please a couple fundamentalist Congress members or something, but the decision to lift the ban was not haphazard, right? I mean, a lot of thought and research went into it on the part. Now, correct me if I'm wrong again, but on the part of folks whose primary job it is to keep America safe, and they said this was a good idea. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, the Pentagon doesn't do anything haphazard. It's methodical and thoughtful about how it does any policy shift or substantive change. The president's tweet is the absolute 180 on that. It's not how the Pentagon handles situations at all. And the Pentagon did, to your point, and as I said earlier, did over a year study on lifting the ban on transgender service, the costs associated, how they would do implementation, et cetera, et cetera.
So, so, of course, what they found then, what that means is that there was no good reason to ban transgender people, and there was no harm that would come from lifting the ban. So right now, and again, we're recording this on Thursday, but right now, Trump has not cited anything in the way of evidence, except for the fact that he says it's too expensive to provide gender reassignment surgery. Is that correct?
That's what he's citing. When the Pentagon did its study, they determined that the costs were going to be negligible in their overall defense budget. So roughly between $3.4 and $8 million is the healthcare costs associated with transgender service members. The overall defense budget is roughly about $657 billion, depending on how Congress passes it this year, but it's 0.001% of the overall defense budget. So the healthcare costs aren't even a valid concern for the president, or should not be a valid concern for the president.
That's a rounding error on the F-35, if I'm not mistaken. But okay, and in another development today, as you know, now the military has apparently said that it's not going to implement this policy just because of some tweets, which seems appropriate. I really don't want the United States armed forces reacting on the basis of a tweet from anyone, including the president. I'm told, reports say, according to Reuters, that the Joint Chiefs have said there's going to be no change in policy on this issue until official guidance is received from the president or the defense secretary, and that a letter from the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, said, quote, "In the meantime, we will continue to treat all of our personnel with respect." Now, I'm not an expert in bureaucratese, but I'm somewhat bilingual in it. That sounds to me like a diss.
I can't speak for the chairman. I think that, based on reporting that I've seen over the last 24 hours and our contacts at the Pentagon, nobody at the Pentagon or very few people, I don't know who they spoke to, but nobody in senior staff, and I believe it was confirmed today that none of the service chiefs were made aware that this tweet was coming, or these tweets were coming. So I think this is, I have an immense amount of respect for Chairman Dunford. He is approaching this from a very methodical and thoughtful place, I believe, which is how we do military policy in this country, not by, tweeting craziness at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. And it did cause a lot of chaos in the system, which is something that hurts our national security interests around the world. We have 15,500 transgender service members, some of which are deployed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and potential hotspots like North Korea and Syria.
Yeah, of course, and keeping us safe. And again, Matt Thorn is not interim, permanent executive director of OutServe SLDN. Now, so Matt, but I also, and again, neither of us, of course, can speak for the general, but we will continue to treat all of our personnel with respect. That struck me as, and again, I may be reading into it, but that struck me as him saying, we will not turn our back on any of our personnel.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I took it. Secretary Mattis also was involved on defeating the Hartzler Amendment 2 weeks ago, which was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act. It is unprecedented for a Department of Defense to reverse itself on a policy that would be this momentous of a policy shift. It really would be like Eisenhower trying to resegregate the force after desegregation. It's really that absurd and that ludicrous that we have a president and a commander-in-chief who just doesn't understand or have a really good grasp of how the military actually works. It's highly unusual that they would turn around on policy. And these, at the end of the day, these are service members first who happen to be transgender. It is fundamentally important that their units and their fellow service members have their back, because those service members have their back. We have had no issues with readiness, no issues with cohesion. In fact, over the last 24 hours, we've heard a swell of support from commands and units around the world who have been rallying around our transgender service members and giving them much needed support in this very crazy and hectic time.
Well, that's really heartening to hear. I mean, even those of us who have at times been critical of our military policy, it's possible as a nation at times, many times perhaps for some of us, but it is still possible to recognize that the military has traditionally been a great democratizing force for where people come together of all different backgrounds and all different orientations and work together and defend one another, protect one another, that creates a level of social cohesion. It can advance the process of integrating different parts of our society together. So it is heartening to hear, and it gets to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Matt Thorn, which is, have you heard, one of the things we covered on this program this week is that in addition to this decision. It's not happening in a vacuum. We also have the Trump Justice Department trying to argue this week that that LGBT rights are not covered by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So taken together, the transgender ban and that argument on behalf of the Justice Department, I could see how all of this could be especially demoralizing to the people that your organization serves, which is LGBT people in the armed forces. How are folks taking it as far as you can tell?
Well, I mean, we had a president who on the campaign trail constantly said he was the biggest LGBT advocate and ally, on the planet. And when you fire 15,500 people, or, that's what you're alluding to in your tweet, who happen to be transgender service members, and you have your Justice Department saying that sexual orientation and gender identity aren't protected under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, that's not being an advocate. These protections and the ability to serve in our military, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation, sex, or national origin or status, these are fundamental aspects of our country for equality. And this president and this administration is not doing anything to say that they're an advocate. In fact, they are really deconstructing the advancements that have been made over the last 10 years and basically saying that you are less than and you are a second-class citizen.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Matt, before we go on to my last question, we've been rightfully, I think, emphasizing the rights of trans and LGBT people in general in this conversation. But as you alluded to earlier, and I just want to underline the point before we move on, it also shows, at least in my opinion, and you're free to disagree, that we have a president who is dangerous for the military when he does things like recklessly and without any kind of comprehension or thought, tweet out a major change to military policy that could destabilize our national security. The other message of this, besides the bias that's being shown, is this guy is really a bad guy to have at the head of the military. Now, you don't have to agree with that if you don't, but that's my takeaway.
I would take a middle of the road. He did win the election, but I don't think he has a very clear grasp of policy in general, whether it's military policy, education policy, you name it. I don't think he has a very clear understanding of how our federal government works. I understand that the American electorate wanted to shake up the system, but when you shake the system too hard, sometimes things start really falling apart. And yes, Washington needed to be cleaned up a little bit, but we're going to extremes in this nature, and that's not helpful. And the chaos, particularly when it comes to the military, is fundamentally a national security issue. We have transgender service members who now have anxiety and are questioning and trying to figure out what these tweets actually mean and if they're going to be discharged while they're trying to do the mission that we've asked them as a country to do around the world.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. So my last question for you would be this. What can people do to stay informed, and is there anything people can do to take action about this?
So people can visit our website. We have an FAQ page that's up, so people can find out particular questions. So that's outserve-sldn.org. Obviously, we're trying to raise money because if the president actually puts this into action, we have every intention of taking him to court, and litigation is expensive when you go against the government. But we have right now a tweet does not make federal policy. So until the president actually goes beyond that and puts something in writing, we are obviously doing press. We're asking individuals to attend, rallies in their neighborhoods or wherever they live. Get involved with the national organizations that are working on this issue, like Outserve SLDN. We're also working very closely with Lambda Legal. Get involved with us. We'll have volunteer opportunities, etc. But the moment that he does cross over from social media and tweets to actual policy, we will be taking him to court.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. And I guess in conclusion, it would not be accurate to say that the 15,000 transgender people serving in the American military are winning so much that they're sick of winning?
We still have a long way to go. I mean, this administration's already exhaustive after 6 months. I don't even know what my hair will look like in 3.5 more years.
Well, probably mine. It will look like mine, and I'm sorry to tell you that. But Matt Thorn, Executive Director of Outserve SLDN, thanks so much for your good work, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.